So there'll be comments that stream here. I think it'd be really cool.
Oh, cool.
I think we're live. Okay. Well, let's get started. I'm with Mick Johnson from Lexi. I'm Matthew Ho from Sydney Startups. Welcome to the Sydney Startups Product Management broadcast.
Thank you. Very, very excited to do my first ever AMA. I'll try not to screw it up.
Okay, cool. So this AMA was in a lot of demand because a lot of people were interested in product management. There also isn't a lot of product management resources, or I think people in the community don't know a lot of product managers. And so the audience, from what I understand, are like founders of companies, people who wanted to get into product management, and actual product management people themselves as well. So maybe I'll start with a kind of, maybe actually I'd love to just hear your background. Like, how did you get to where you are today?
By accident. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my 20s. I spent some time in Japan. I was doing some karate and teaching English. I got back and discovered what startups were because a bunch of my friends were in sensory networks.
Yep.
So I went there. I did some engineering. I did some marketing there. And I kind of fell into a PM role.
Yep.
Then a couple of friends and I started our first startup together, which was a gas price finder.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of just started doing startups. I'd moved to the US.
This was a gas bag.
Yeah, this was GasBag.
Yeah.
And I crowdsourced gas price finder, and it was pretty cool for its time. We tried another couple of startups. We got into YC. We ended up with a pretty cool acqui-hire acquisition sort of a thing with Facebook and Zynga. I spent 4 years at Facebook. And really that's the first time I ever formally was a product manager, and I didn't really know what it was until maybe 9 months into the job.
Yeah. Sounds like my journey as well. So I guess one thing I'm really interested in is what did you do as a product manager, and what's the definition of a product manager? That's the top question that we get today. And I know you've got a lot of experience in this area. Like we noticed that you were pretty active in the forum. So like you're probably one of the best people for us to reach out to and ask. So yeah, I'd love to hear your view.
All right. So I want to separate two things. One is product as a discipline, and the other is the job function of being a product manager. The second relates to the first, but I'll start with the first.
Okay.
And so one of the interesting things about building products today is how many components there are, right? So if you're trying to build some service, some website, some app, something in the world compared to what was required 30 years ago, one of the hardest decisions, really, I would say the hardest decision left, is what to build, right? Like you can get the hardware you need, you can get the APIs you need, there's ways to scale marketing, there's ways to scale customer acquisition in all sorts of forms, there's APIs for pretty much any tool you could want. So the question is, as kind of the Marc Andreessen software eating the world thing, if you can build anything at all, what do you build?
Yeah.
Right? What are the fundamental things about human nature? What are the things that the world needs? And so that is the discipline of product, as I see it.
Yeah.
You can call it product picking, you can call it product control, you can call it product ownership, but fundamentally the world is, there's this version of the world and you want to build this better version of the world. What is the path from A to B?
So I just heard, so just to interrupt you a bit, so I saw that Benjamin's joined us. He actually shared an article recently called Product Picker.
Yeah.
And I was like, product picker sounds like a product manager. Like you're deciding, I think, why are we doing this, and then what are we doing? Exactly,
and what's important, and how do you frame? And so so I think product management, being a product manager as a role, that is a large part of the job. When I used to hire PMs and recruit for PMs at Facebook, we used to say that there's kind of this skeleton, which is project management, which is the ability to take any problem, break it down into components, figure out how to execute against it. Do you need people? Do you need money? Do you need time? Right? Like that is the skeleton on which everything else hangs. But above that, you need the ability to take qualitative and quantitative data and make good product decisions, the ability to communicate those decisions, and we used to call it leadership or confidence or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you are always working with imperfect data.
Yes.
And so there's another article I've seen shared around, which is PMs are similar to people either in the military or chefs.
Okay.
Because you're in a high pressure environment where you need to make good decisions rapidly based on imperfect information. If you're a chef in a restaurant and suddenly one of the stoves catches fire and someone's not coming in today, but you still need everyone to get a great meal at the end of it and be turning out meals, chop, 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 chop.
Yeah.
That's very similar to product management. And I think that relates to how do you become a PM, how do you work on product.
Yeah.
There's really no substitute for doing it. And so that confidence and that ability and that understanding of how to execute, the ability to make good decisions, whether they're based on human intuition of the human condition or partially accurate, partial quantitative data, as well as the ability to communicate why you're doing something. That's really the art of product management.
Yeah, I find that so just a bit of background, I'm also a product manager at Atlassian, and I found that I used to actually start a lot of like pages and requirements, not with what, but like why are we doing this? Like what's the purpose? And like I feel like that's really important. And then you delve into the details. I think at a engineering heavy company, and maybe you can relate as well, it's very easy to get into implementation. Like let's do this, but like why? And then what metric are we going to move if we do this as well?
That's right. And it's something I still struggle with. My co-founders are phenomenal, and they gave me some good blunt feedback the other day, which is I still suck at communication in many of the times when I need to, because things are clear in my head, and I assume they're clear in other people's heads, but they're not. And so much of this job is to explain what is the frame, what is the problem we're solving, why does that problem matter, than all these other problems we could be solving, and then what is the solution.
Probably should give a shout out to your co-founders watching. So it's who's
Alex North and Adam Shook, who may be watching. They may have just landed in Sydney because they were both over here.
Okay.
So they may be in Sydney Airport right now.
Yeah. That's awesome. All that feedback. I actually want to ask you as well. Like a lot of people want to get into product management, and that's like number one question that I get as well. You mentioned that you're making good decisions. You're making products in the past. Like, how can people get into it? And the people that you've hired in the past, how did they get into it? Like, what were you looking for?
So one of the things I did at Facebook was manage the rotational PM program. And so that's where we were trying to do a few things. We were trying to have another channel for hiring great PMs. We were also trying to break down some of the political silos that form inside large companies by having people rotate from one team to another team and so on. And it's a really hard thing to hire for, because you go to universities and you say, would you like to be a PM? And they say, I didn't study to be a PM.
Yeah.
But there isn't really, in my opinion, an effective course on how to be a PM. It's something that you learn by doing. And so we looked for people that had some combination of skills, strong analytical capabilities, good communication abilities, strong technical understanding were all good, but really people who like to build stuff. And so a popular question when I was at Facebook was from people who weren't PMs. They were working in user operations, or they were designers, or they were engineers, or they were analysts who wanted to be PMs. When they asked me how they could transfer into PM, I said, go to a hackathon and try to help a team build something great.
Yeah.
And so hackathons at Facebook were typically overnight, and so you'd join a team at 3 p.m. or 6 p.m. and you had until 9 a.m. the next day. And everything that occurs in being a PM over a 3-month project will occur over those 9 hours.
Yeah.
How do you inspire? How do you filter down on the features? How do you mediate disagreements? How do you clarify the questions? And if you try it, you'll both learn, A, do you have any instinct for it? And B, do you enjoy it? Because I'll say this, it can be a very frustrating job. Because you learn rapidly that you are the worst person to actually do the building. And so you have to frame it and frame the problem and help people understand why it should be built. But oftentimes they'll build it in a different way to what you envisage, and you
Yeah.
have to map long-term productivity and understanding and engagement of your team against perhaps the clarity of your vision initially, and accept that your vision could be wrong.
Yeah, I think you touched on a few things. So firstly, we just had a hackathon that's still on today at Atlassian. We have a thing called Ship It. I think it's very similar to the Hack Days
Sure.
at Facebook, so it's over 24 hours. And then right now they're probably presenting at the finals. This
Cool.
is in Mountain View and in San Francisco.
Cool.
I find it's really good as well because you have, in a very short period of time, like with these hackathons, you work on something completely different as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it forces me to get out of my comfort zone, and you work with new people,
Mm-hmm.
and you very quickly have to define the requirements. And as a PM on the team, people keep turning to you like, what should we do? Like, well, what are we doing next? But it's like super keen to build stuff.
Yeah, there's an aspect of ensuring you can keep up momentum and execution and framing goals and things like that, which is, I mean, it's the project management skeleton, right?
Yeah. I actually think as well, like there's also a difference. It overlaps also a difference between product management and project management. So product managers shouldn't be project managers, but like your job kind of involves some of that. And you touched on it before. I find that as a product manager, you need to also kind of lead the team as well to define that vision. What's the roadmap? Also, what you're building usually has like a longer lifespan as well. Like projects are very short defined, like 3 months. You don't want to be like managing stuff. You need to be leading and inspiring and setting the pace as well.
I think that's right. And I think to jam on that, you need to be able to talk at multiple frames of reference. So you need to be able to describe, where will this be in 2 years? Where will we be in 6 months? Where should we be at the end of the week? And what matters in this hour?
Yes.
Right? And that ability to zoom in and out, for the great product leaders I've met, from Zuck, who is just amazing, to a bunch of the people I worked with at Facebook, to other people I've met outside Facebook and at YC and everywhere else. That is one of the key characteristics, is the ability to communicate at different scales. Yeah.
So we've actually got one of our first questions come through from Peter Delahunty. It says, "Hey Mick, exclamation mark. Looking well. Nice YC hoodie." I actually didn't notice.
Yeah, that's the orange.
Okay. The question is, I find good engineers make good PMs. What do you think?
A lot of the time they do. Facebook's PM culture, when I joined, there were about 20 PMs, and I would say 15 of them were ex-startup CEOs. And so if you look at the types of problems that you need to solve as a PM, one is the 0 to 1 problem, right? You do not have product market fit, right? You need to try a whole host of things with very, very sparse, ambiguous data. Another is the one-to-many problem, which is you have something and you need to really grow it. And another is, I guess, what I call the turnaround problem, which is it's pretty obvious what the big problems with the product are. You just need to help a team get motivated and enthused and work its way out of that. For what it's worth, that's mostly what my successes at Facebook were mostly in that camp. Everyone knew that people needed to use Facebook mobile. There was too much stuff going on. We were focusing in the wrong direction. It was just like, turn that thing around. I have seen engineers be great PMs. I've seen engineers be really bad PMs. The thing that engineers as PMs typically get for free is a little bit more respect from the engineers that they work with in terms of understanding the problem. But that can actually be a dangerous crutch. Yeah.
I mean, actually, there's a question here from Ryan Cross, non-tech PM. So I can take this one because I'm a non-tech PM.
Do it.
But feel free to jump in as well.
No, go.
I find that like, and this is one of the questions later on about working with engineers as well. Like, I think one thing is, as a non-tech PM, but even as a tech PM, it's really important to have an understanding of the customer, like a really deep understanding of what the problem is, and representing them in the room. The other thing I try to do is bring insights into the team. So usually you're working with the engineering team, they're very removed from the customer. And so what I try to do is bring in like insights, like customer interviews, analytics. But I think also importantly, like you need to have technical understanding, even as a non-engineer. So usually like in my team right now, I think it's about 7, 8 engineers. Previously it was like 8 or 9 engineers. I could be in a room and be the only non-engineer in the room. And I try to also leverage that as an advantage. So hey, like what do I bring to the table? Like I know the customers like really, really well. I also, one thing that I try to do as well with my team is communicate really well as well. So I find that part of my job I work in a platform team, so we service a lot of other products. We have to communicate out to different stakeholders.
Sure.
Whereas running a blog post or sharing things out. So I think technical is one half of the equation, and then the other half is understanding like customer value, which any PM needs to be able to do. So.
And so this is a roundabout answer to your question, Peter. It's one aspect, but some of the best PMs I've known were totally non-technical. Typically, they had some other things that they were great at, like analytical understanding. They could dive through, SQL or spreadsheets or whatever, and come out with super interesting knowledge super quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like as a PM, you need to be deep in say one area or two areas. For me, it's mobile. I've been working in that space for the last 6 years or so. I try to be also strong in areas like UX and design. Where I'm probably not the strongest in is in engineering. But that's why I have an engineering team of 8 or 9 people.
Yep.
And even my team and even my managers don't worry about that bit as much. Focus on customer value. Yeah. And that's being what's the customer going to get out of this? How is the experience going to change for them? That's what really matters.
I agree, and I think that's the meta answer there is you need to deliver whatever your team needs. Right? And so if you have a really eng-heavy team, but they have less insight into the customer, you can bring that. One of the things they push in YC all the time is to go out and talk to your users. Right? One of the things that the Facebook ads team did pretty successfully, it totally turned around their execution, is they made everyone who joined the ads team sit on a customer support call for 2 hours and actually listen to what people were asking about. And prior to that, no one in Facebook HQ actually knew what the customer support reps were saying.
Yeah.
And so you need to solve that in some way, whether it's what you bring to the table or what you help the team get on their own. Yeah.
So I've got a question from the AMA. It was, a PM has to juggle many different requirements from different stakeholders. Probably something we're familiar with. How do you combine various requirements into a coherent product? And how do you prioritize the requirements from each stakeholder?
Depends a bit on the product. If you're working on a platform product and mostly what you're trying to do is help other product teams within your company be happy, there's a little bit of, who's in the company, who's going to get the most value for the needs that they have. Actually, how do they rank? You'll always get slightly different communication messages from them, right? That's mostly just a juggling problem. But the really, the 0 to 1 stuff, right, where when potentially no one has any idea what matters. That is both the hardest and, to me, the most fascinating product work that's around, right? So one of the things that we tried to do on Facebook search, and I failed at, was to make it a behavior where you weren't just looking for entities. Where you were actually trying to tap into the trillions of pieces of content to actually understand, should I buy this vacuum cleaner, or what's the best beach to go to, or things like that. And that's where I think it's really incumbent on you to think, okay, what are the fundamentals of the human condition that will be true in 5 years and even more true than they are now? What are my internal biases that make me see the world a certain way, and how do I compensate for that? And then what is the simplest version of that where I can learn rapidly what matters? And then you line up the various requests from stakeholders against it, and you communicate, we're going to learn this, this, and this. We're not going to learn that this time.
Because I work in a platform team. I work in a team that does new user experience. It's called now in Nux. And so we actually work with a lot of product teams, and we get lots of requirements coming in. And so you're getting pushed in a certain direction. But I think it's important as a platform team to also say, hey, this is our position, this is our stance, this is what we think is best for the company and for all the products as well. And so it is a bit of a push and pull. And I'm in those conversations all the time with all these different stakeholders. But at the end of the day, I also try to think what's going to have the biggest impact and for customers, try to prioritize that way.
I think that's right. There's also a piece of fairness there. So when we were doing the Facebook for iOS rewrite, and we told the whole company that they couldn't get their feature in So for 6 months or something, no one got a new feature on iOS because we locked features and we're rebuilding all of these things in native. Everyone complained, but everyone knew it was fair.
Yeah.
Right? And they had other places to test on mobile web or on Android or something. But if we had started saying, okay, you can't get in, but you can get in, then the ecosystem effect would have been worse. And so ecosystem understanding is generally a thing that you see more in really strong PMs than in more junior PMs. Not just what will this action cause, but in combination of this action over time, what does that cause, right?
Yeah, and also understanding dependencies as well. Thinking ahead of time, I need this from this team, I need to get ahead of everyone else.
Yep.
So I got a question here from Jonathan Peacock. It says, as startups, we're always trying to build the right things faster. How do you prioritize? Talk us through the process of working out prioritization of features, and does that approach change from startups to big companies?
I think so. A buddy of mine, Ryan Juni, who's much more successful than I am, one of the things he's taught me is that your fitness function at an early stage startup is the rate at which you learn. Not the rate at which you execute, not the rate at which you build features. How rapidly are you learning week in, week out? Now, this is related to the quality of your engineering and how rapidly you build features, because if you build on bad infrastructure or only do short-term hacks all the time, then your rate of testing will degrade. But I think when you're trying to go from default dead to default alive, do you know these two things? Yeah, like you just have to get there as quickly as you can. How quickly can you learn what will work versus what can't? And that's how you prioritize a feature. Is this feature could be great, but it'll take 4 months to build. This feature is a little less great, but we'll learn in 3 days. Let's do the 3-day version.
Is another interesting thing that I try to think about at work is like we work on SaaS products. And so a customer has to subscribe monthly. And it's probably similar to Facebook as well in that like we have to think about how can we deliver like continuous value to customers. So you got to kind of have to trade off. Well, let me take a step back. I try to think, what's that bigger picture? Like, what's the vision of what we're trying to do? And how do we get there in each release? It's almost like this is a movie and this is a scene in each movie. And I try to think about like, and I had this yesterday actually, our roadmap. These are the big rocks that we're trying to do. And then what are the rocks and these are little pebbles. And how can we get a mixture of all three? Because if we just go after only big rocks, which is still important, we may not deliver anything for like 6 to 12 months.
And then the team loses momentum and typically motivation, and that's not great.
Yeah. So I got another question here. It's kind of related. It's from Benjamin Woetz. I think he's online, actually. It says, what was the toughest trade-off you had to make in your life as a product manager? I took that as like the hardest decision, because a lot of times as a product manager, you're saying yes to something, but also no to a whole range of things as well.
There are a few. I really like hard decisions. It's one of the things that you get a little addicted to, is once you've gone through and cut something that you desperately want to build, and it's going to be so great, but you just know it's less important than these other things. There is this weird masochistic joy in doing so. One of the things, it wasn't personally hard for me, but there was so much drama around it, was when I eliminated landscape mode from the Facebook for iPhone app.
Oh, it is that. It's only portrait. Right?
Yeah, there's a few views. So media, photos, and videos, it exists in, but everything else it doesn't exist in. And this was a big regression to how it used to work. And so the trade-off we were making was, if we supported landscape mode, every single developer, every single designer within Facebook would need to support it. That's a cost that's compounded when you have other languages that had an additional row on the keyboard, which was particularly painful for older iPhones. And so I kind of just put my foot down and said, this does not matter enough. If you look at other things out there in the ecosystem, including Instagram at that time, they have amazing user experiences without this. And the way that was palatable internally is we actually had this wiki page, which is, we called it Not in Wild. Wild was the code name for the release. We had 40 features in it. And for each of them, we said, we're not putting this in. This is why we're not putting it in. If X happens, we
Yeah.
will bring it back, and this is how long it will take.
Yeah.
And I answered the question probably 40 times, what about landscape mode?
Yeah.
I'd say, go and look at this page.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, there were a handful of complaints about it, but not enough. And of the 40 features we cut, no one noticed 30 of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that as well. Like if you release, say, a feature, you have to maintain it as well. And then you have to do other things as a consequence.
Yep.
And so you have to think about like the back end of what's going to happen.
There's an n squared complexity to features.
Yeah.
Right? Everything that you have will have a cost against everything else that you add in the future. So the more you can cut, the better.
Yeah, I've got another question here. It's from Jason Seen.
Yep.
It says, what are the consistent common traps that you see product managers fall into?
Hubris.
Like, as in believing their own opinion? And
Believing that they're great.
Yeah.
And thereby believing their own opinion. This is my trap.
it's like, hey, I wouldn't do this, or
Yeah.
other people wouldn't do this.
Well,
either.
not even that. Just like I'm the PM, therefore I'm right. You know, that's the most common flaw. The best way to guard against that is to continually ask your team to ask you really hard questions and to answer them transparently, to be transparent about your thinking.
Yeah.
What are some other traps? I think the one you point out around having your own biases, being unable to enunciate what your biases are.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the big ones for
Okay.
PMs. Yeah.
I think we've got a few questions here. Let's see if we can pick one of them. Let's pick this one. Gautier Fabio. What makes a good product team composition? What skills do you need in the team? Let's talk about your own team, like the one that you're currently working in.
Yep.
Hopefully they're a good product team.
They're awesome. They are awesome. I'm the weakest link. So the things I think you need in teams in startups more generally are a sense of accountability and ownership.
Mm-hmm.
That you're all in it together. One of the things we do is just be almost brutally transparent internally. Everyone knows everyone's salary.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows everyone's equity. Everyone knows everything about the company.
Mm-hmm.
The only way that we succeed is if we build this into a phenomenal, world-changing product, right? Like that's it, and everyone is in it together. We're across Sydney and Australia, 4 engineers, including my 2 co-founders in Sydney, 2 engineers and myself here. We get together in person every 8 weeks. We have an always-on video conference, etc. Right? And I think that degree of trust and transparency is critical in any team.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even more so when you're searching for product market fit, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're learning new things all the time, and you need to believe that, you know, this person on the team tried something, they learned X. Mm-hmm. I trust this person, therefore I trust that X is probably correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty important. I'm a strong believer that in kind of building things full stack, right? Which doesn't always work. You'll always have some people that are better doing front end versus back end versus infrastructure versus services. Yeah. But it's really helpful when someone does thread a feature all the way through and understand it all the way through. And so, especially at this size of team where we're 7 engineers, I think having everyone able to write code anywhere is essential.
I'm just going to share a little bit about like the product team structure at Atlassian.
Great.
So this is not necessarily common, but like I've been in 2 of these teams. So we have a structure called a triad. And a triad is usually like a product manager, a dev manager, and a designer. So it's almost like I see it as like a startup of like 3 key people that you need. Not necessarily all teams need to have that, but if you have it, it gives you balance as well. Because you got like the design UX opinion, the product, like kind of go to market, customer opinion, and then you got like the tech opinion and position as well.
Makes total sense. Yeah, and that's very similar to the Facebook frame as well.
All right, let's charge on to the next question. So it's from Rohan Swami. How has the role of product manager varied at different companies you've been in? So you've been at Zynga and Facebook and your own.
I've only been at Facebook. Okay. So our acquisition was the IP and my co-founder were acquired by Zynga, and I was acqui-hired by Facebook. And Facebook paid my startup for the right to acqui-hire me without us suing him. Okay. It was a pretty complex deal. But I've only been a product manager at 1 company. So I'm not very good at answering that question.
Okay. Actually, I want to take a bit of a break here. We've heard a lot about your startup, but what does your startup Lexi actually do? I'd love for you to share it with the community. Can you say what it's about?
So we're holding back on press deliberately because we want to use it to get more customers. We have some trial customers already.
Yeah.
They're phenomenal. But we want to make sure that we have a scalable sales process and a scalable product before we open the floodgates. And we've kind of saved up, who we got funded by and what we're building and what it is until that point in time.
Okay.
This group's probably a bit large to
blurt
it out.
It's just you and I. Just forget about the other 8,000 people that could be potentially watching.
Yeah. So, but I'll say this: we're working on natural language processing. As a general thing, I think the biggest opportunity in terms of what will happen with technology over the next, decade is unlocking text. Right? Like the things we should be able to understand about a block of text and the things that actually we do understand about a block of text are just leagues apart. Right? We want to solve that fundamentally.
Cool. Well, yeah, once you can share it, then feel free to post to Sydney Startups.
Yeah, sure. Would love to.
So next question is from Gary Lowe. How did the product team scale with both Facebook and mobile becoming so big with so much breadth? What's the key to being able to stay quick and innovative while serving such a big audience? Because you've obviously got like 1 billion users, right? How do you stay nimble?
So when I joined Facebook Mobile, there was one iOS engineer for the biggest iOS app on the platform, and he was about to quit. Because he just, oh my God, it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So much pressure, everyone complaining. Facebook Mobile internally was seen as a pretty crappy team. The app was 2 stars, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It scaled up to perhaps 200 people in the organization, team of 15 PMs. I think at that time there were about 15 iOS engineers, 20 Android. And we were around 1 billion users on mobile.
This is like MAU, like monthly active users?
Yeah, this was MAU. Okay. I think the daily to monthly ratio was somewhere between 60 and 70%.
Yeah, like I've seen it obviously over the years. There's more and more people now on the mobile app. I mean, I use it like every day as well. So, in fact, this is like we're broadcasting on Facebook.
There we are. And so I guess I think that's still pretty small as a team, right? Like 15 iOS engineers and 20 Android for, 1 billion users on mobile. And of course, one of the things we did is we scaled out mobile as a function and then dissolved the mobile team entirely, including my role. And then I went to do search and language at Facebook.
Actually, it's interesting because I work in a mobile team. Do you have like mobile people in each team, as well as the specialist Facebook mobile team, or is it now?
Well, there is no Facebook mobile team.
Okay.
We eliminated it completely. There's a Facebook infra team, and so React and React Native were built by some members of the old Facebook mobile team, but they sit with the rest of product infrastructure at Facebook, who build, the JavaScript componentry and how, privacy backends work and those sorts of things. And so kind of the mobile arc at Facebook was step 1, get the mobile products to not suck. Step 2, build components that other teams could use. Step 3, help the other teams understand that it mattered. And a lot of that was social engineering. And then step 4, delete the mobile team. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we've got a few more questions to ask, but I'd love to hear any from the audience as well, but feel free to post them up there and we'll select a few. So the next question is from Gary Lowe. He says, what are your top tips with working with engineers, devs as a product person? Kind of covered that a bit. We'd love to do a deep dive.
Man, I wish I had done a startup of the current size before I went to Facebook. And so when I've done startups before as myself and a couple of co-founders, you have very high communication bandwidth, you have a lot of empathy.
Yeah.
But doing this one where, you're paying people salaries and you're recruiting them away from much higher paying jobs, it just gives you a totally different appreciation.
Yeah.
Right, for what teams are and what teams should be. I would have been such a better PM at Facebook if I had done a company like that first. I just didn't understand it. And so I think empathy is your number one skill and your number one requirement. And when I talked about traps of PMs, hubris and believing believing your own talk. Like that's the opposite of this.
Do you mean empathy with customers or empathy with engineers, or
the latter? The latter.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that some of the anti-patterns for PMs are to treat engineers as cogs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cogs in a machine as resources. Right. You can sometimes struggle a bit as a PM, especially in a larger company, because many of the things you should be doing are nominally the responsibility of the dev lead, which is to think about the career growth of that engineer, or to care about, even care about them as a person, think about what they're good at, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I actually see that as a fundamental requirement of the PM.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that. Like a good friend of mine, Jordan Sim, who works at BigCommerce as a PM, he said a lot of being about PM is about relationships.
Yeah.
So just caring about your engineering team and the product team in general.
Yep.
And deeply sympathizing with them and caring about their lives as well. And actually, it was really interesting when we were talking to him. His opinion was that the product is actually an outcome of a really great functioning team.
Yeah.
That it works really well together. That's in sync. That's transparent.
So one of my early bosses at Facebook was a chap called Carl Sjogren, who was at Google and then at Facebook. Now has a great company called Seesaw. I remember something he told me is that all problems are people problems. There are no tech problems. There are only people problems. Your fundamental job is to get the right people and to help them believe in a vision. And then they not you, how the product gets built.
So I've got another question from Benjamin Wirtz.
Yep.
He said, what did you do to become a better PM and advance your career? Specifically, courses, blogs, or skills you picked up or worked on?
I did no courses. I read no blogs. I had no idea what Agile or any of these things were until after I left Facebook.
You kind of just did it, right?
You just do it. And to some degree, I think it comes back to execution and why ex-startup CEOs were the early PMs at Facebook. Is when you're going from 0 to 1, one of the most important characteristics internally is determination, right?
Just the hustle, right? Just trying to break through that wall of
hustle always has this negative connotation for me because it feels like you're taking advantage of someone, but walking through walls is a much better one.
Yeah, I find that as well. Sometimes as a non-engineering PM, I don't understand fully the limitations. I was like, why can't we do this? This is what customers want. Yeah. And that sometimes helps, and sometimes it hinders as well.
I think you should lean into that. So one of the most impressive things about Mark Zuckerberg is his question to answer ratio. So I've met other senior execs, and you'll present something to them, and they'll kind of nod, and you can kind of tell that they don't really get it, but they want to look like they're smart.
Yeah.
And Zuck won't have a bar of that. You'll get halfway through, and he'll say, "Stop! I don't understand this bit."
Yeah.
Can you explain it again?
Yeah.
And then you have to explain it again. And if you can't explain it better the second time, he'll turn to the person next to you and say, "I didn't understand that. Can you explain it?" I've made that mistake.
It's like the several times, right?
Yeah. And so just being really open to saying, "I don't understand it. Help me understand." And so empathy is a part of that too, but help me understand what the problem is. Help me understand why this is hard. Break it down for me. Is a really, really good tool as a PM.
Yeah, I mean, I do that as well. And sometimes I feel like I'm looking a bit stupid, I keep asking, and then they look at me like, "Hey, how come you don't understand?" They keep explaining. But generally, I feel like the people I work with, they understand, "Okay, we'll explain it again. If you don't get it, then maybe..."
There's something we used to say at YC. There's two things you cannot have as a startup founder. Fear and shame. These will just get in your way. You need to be willing as a startup founder to walk up to anyone and say, "Hey, I have an app. Can I buy you coffee? I just want to watch you use it for 2 minutes. I'll buy you a beer, 2 coffees, whatever it takes." Right? Look for brutally honest feedback. And there's similar things in terms of feeling like you look stupid in front of engineers.
So I'm actually going to sneak in a question on my own. So I've just joined a new team recently. So I used to work in the Sydney office of Atlassian. I've just joined a new team in Mountain View.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, in, say, the first 30 to 90 days, what do you do when you join a new team? What's your process and how do you think about it?
Man, I wish I had a better answer. I think I just stumbled into things. I joined Facebook Mobile and I didn't even know what I was supposed to be doing, honestly, for the first couple of weeks, probably the first month. I just tried to find things that people wanted and worked on them. And then I started managing people, and that's just its own thing. I think the better answer is to find things your team see as valuable and do that as quickly as you can. And this was my advice for rotational PMs, where they'd be on a rotation for 3 months, right? 3-4 months. And so within that first week, they needed to show that they were helping in some way. And that could be bringing in new analytics. It could be mocking things up. It can be organizing the task list. It can be taking people out to dinner. It can be fixing up the workspace. Doesn't matter. Do what it takes. I used to describe the job of a PM as the person who rides the pedal-powered generator to keep everyone's laptops going when the power goes out, right? Like, that's the job. And I think it's almost like startups themselves. When you're getting momentum, when you're starting to get traction, the market will pull you towards the product that you need to build. The team that you work with will do the same thing, as long as you're helping them move forward. And they feel like you're in it with them, and they'll say, you know what, it's good that you're doing this, but I wish you could do more of that. And then you do more of that. Right? I think is the trick.
I think that's good advice. I will share a little bit about
what did you do?
So my experience, I came into the team, and like we had like our milestones, kind of like our schedule, what we wanted to deliver. But I felt like our team, firstly, didn't have an explicit roadmap. So that was the first thing that I wanted to do. Even before that, I was like, what's the mission of our team? Like, what are we trying to do? So try to define that. What's the vision? And then have like a roadmap. And then this is like my first week. And then I started communicating that to stakeholders. And that was good because I tried to raise the visibility of the team. It's particularly important in a big company. Like, no one knows what you're doing. So we did that. And then it was good sharing that with other teams. And they were saying, hey, you can do that. That's great. This aligns with us, but this doesn't. You're not going to be able to do this in time. So that was good. The other thing I started doing was just like, it's probably a lot common I found in tech companies, like one-on-ones with people. So just having one-on-one with each team member, explaining to them, hey, how do you think the team's going? Where are we heading? And then trying to share some of my thinking and the goals. I feel like that's really important with the engineering team. So this is where we want to get to. These are our goals. And that kind of helps them get there as well and empowers them.
Totally agree.
Because like they're making product decisions, I feel like every day as well. If they understand, hey, this is what we're trying to do, this is the customer value, that will help them. So,
do you ever ask questions in the negative for feedback?
As in, like, what are we doing wrong? Or?
So a lot of the time what you want is the hard answer, not the like, oh yeah, that's really cool. You want the what's wrong with this? But if you ask, was there anything wrong with this? No one will say yes. But if you say, that felt forced. Did it feel forced to you? Feels like I missed a bunch of pieces in the roadmap. Is that how it felt to you? Right? Let them agree with the negative. And this is true, you know, personally and team-wise. And I think you can do that asking stakeholders.
We've actually got a big bank of questions now. Let's go through a couple of them.
Sure.
So Peter Delahunty asked another question. If lots of customers ask for a specific feature, do you consider it as a solution, or do you always break down the actual problem the customers are having?
You consider it. Many times the thing that people ask for is just an aspect of an underlying problem. There's also, especially with things like App Store reviews, right? It's like 0.1% of people will have some complaint about something, but 99% of people want the other thing and they're happy. You always consider it.
I'm the same. Like, they're just like it's an important source of feedback, but you can't be totally just driven by customer feedback as well. There's also like, what do we think is best, and what are other teams doing as well? So then that to me just becomes part of the kind of customer insights you bring to the team, and also influences your roadmap as well.
I agree.
I like this one from Purek. He asked me this earlier. Is it a natural path for an engineer to become a PM? We kind of touched on this.
I think we touched on it. It can be. The thing that is most frustrating for engineers that do it is you can't build stuff. If you're a PM and you're writing code, you're doing the wrong thing.
I'm actually going to jump to the bottom question a little bit. And actually, someone else asked this as well. Anthony Serchan. It was, do you find there's a difference between how we build products in Silicon Valley versus how we build products in Australia?
Yes. Oh, you want more of an
Yeah,
answer?
like give the audience a bit more.
And I think that's partly because the products that are built in Australia are typically, honestly, they're not even products, right? Like they are adaptations of a service or something. Like taken to the extreme, to the best version of what they could be, they won't impact enough people's lives. And this relates to what I was talking about at the start, which is the only way to truly be a great PM is to do it, to work in the environment where you're trying to change the lives of hundreds of millions of people or billions of people. And that's not the only axis, by the way. Like you can deliver amazing products that only touch 10 million people, but do so in a very profound way, right? Like number of users is just one axis. But I think people don't try and change the world enough in Australia. And as a result, they struggle to get enough experience doing PM. For what it's worth, I've published some provocative essays before suggesting that all innovation will happen in sub 50-person companies in the future.
Oh wow!
Because if you look at the user to engineer ratio over the last 20 years, from Microsoft to WhatsApp, effectively, if you look at what's available in APIs, if you actually want to do something world changing and you can find another 20 people to do it with, and you don't have to have the bureaucracy and slowness of a big company, why would you? Right? Like, why wouldn't you join a small team with a crazy mission and go and do it that way? Right? And so that's where the most interesting product decisions will be made by people in these small teams. Right now, those small teams are concentrated in Silicon Valley, but they don't have to be, right? As people get more experience working on these things in other places, as funding becomes more available in other places, as it's easier to bootstrap businesses. There's a company called Safety Culture that I know reasonably well.
I know them as well.
Yeah, so Luke's from the CEO and founders from Townsville, as I am. And one of the things I said to him is, it is entirely possible to build a WhatsApp in Townsville, right? Like, there's no inherent reason it had to be in Mountain View other than the founders were there and they had a very big vision and executed phenomenally well. But you could do the same thing in Townsville or Rockhampton or, Kalgoorlie, wherever, right? You'd have to start persuading people to come, but if you're successful enough, there'll be enough smart people that want to come.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, given that our community that's watching is in Sydney as well. Because even like Atlassian, it came out of Sydney as well.
Yep.
Like, do you feel like, because you're in Silicon Valley and Sydney, what's that like?
Awesome. No, it's awesome. It's one of the things we think's really fun about our company. And as I alluded to, we plan to be a less than 50-person company forever. We think we can fundamentally change the internet with a tiny company, which relates to, there was a question before about salary transparency. I think it does scale to a 50-person company, but not to a 10,000. But in that world, being able to have, the beaches and coffee of Sydney and the technology and innovation and, to be honest, the craft beer culture of Silicon Valley, we think it's an awesome pairing.
Yeah, because you kind of got like the kind of best of both worlds, which is what Atlassian's trying to do.
Yeah, totally.
Have a foot in each market. Do you feel like startups have to come to Silicon Valley? You mentioned before you could build it out of Townsville, but do they eventually have to come here? Or is there...
I think the founders need to understand the speed at which they need to execute. And so one of the things about being in Y Combinator, and I'd done a startup or two before we got into YC, and we thought we were pretty smart. And then you get into YC and there's, Hipmunk and Homejoy and Rapportive, and they're just building 3 times as much stuff as you in a week. And you're like, oh shit.
Gotta get
that's the bar, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the best things about Silicon Valley is you realize where the bar actually is. And once you know that, once you've internalized it and once you've executed at that scale, then you can do it anywhere. But I think it's hard to understand that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Like, we were talking beforehand, just catching up. like your team's in Sydney and you guys try to sync up every 8 weeks or so.
8 weeks, yeah.
How does that all work? And how do you communicate with them?
Well, this relates to the transparency and trust pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So we do a handful of things. We actually practice a moment of mindfulness for every stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure when people occasionally look through the window and we look like we're doing yoga or meditation or something, they think it's kind of strange. We found that helps. We found that post-commit code review really helps.
Mm-hmm.
So people are coding all the time. We all trust each other, and we'll fix up issues in the code as we go.
Mm-hmm.
But we found it's essential to be in the same room frequently. And we've tried, we experimented with a few things, going for 5 days. That's too short. 3 weeks is a bit long. Bring the family sometimes. That works okay. But right now, the rhythm of roughly 6 to 8 week milestones and a week and a half together works pretty well.
Yeah, because I have this kind of similar situation that we have some team members in Sydney, sometimes people in Austin that we work with as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I try to do with my team, like the technical team, like they catch up regularly. And then I catch up one-on-one with our team in Sydney, like with each engineer as well, just like half an hour a week, just to give them a bit more context. This is what's going on. This is what's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that helps, having like a dedicated time for them.
I agree. And lacking that one-on-one communication, it doesn't seem like a problem initially, but it's a cost that builds over time.
Yeah. So we've got a question here from Nahid Haq.
Mm-hmm.
He says, how's your relationship with the PMMs of your team? What were they doing day to day to help the team? So PMMs being product marketing managers.
I was pretty bad at this. The Facebook in general was pretty bad at it because its marketing for a long time was, we build a great product and you're going to use it. And to both their credit and their detriment, they were right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they kind of fell into that trap. And so for a long time, PMMs at Facebook, they were more on the ads side,
mm-hmm.
but there really wasn't that much consumer marketing that happened.
Yeah.
The phenomenal PMMs at Facebook, some of which came into PM and then have done just, stunning things. So Fiji Simo, who's a VP at Facebook now and basically runs video and a whole bunch of other stuff for Facebook, was originally PMM and just had some of the best analytical understanding and communication skills that you've seen, and could say, this is what we are seeing in the ads world. This is where we need to be going, and formulated a product strategy based on that, and effectively then drove PM from it. Yeah,
I feel like as well, like because I've worked with PMMs as well, like you've got to be in sync. So we used to sync up like once a week and just try to paint a picture, like this is where we're heading. And another thing that we did as well, like almost like the PM wearing the PMM hat, or you could even argue it's PM hat. So what we try to do is kind of work backwards from when we're going to build something. So we try to think about like, what's the blog post going to be like?
Amazon style.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so
sure.
What's like the headline? What's like the customer shop, the customer quote? Because like I think the biggest problem with product teams, like you build something, you throw it over the fence to marketing, and then they try to sell it into the market. It's almost working backwards. Like, how would we sell this to customers, and then how do we build it?
That's right. And so one of the things you have to do as a startup, especially ourselves, where we're selling into enterprise, is do customer development, which could be considered to be a subset of marketing and customer acquisition, and find out what do people need before you even build it, right? That's a core function that you have to do.
So we're going to take a few more questions.
Sure.
So one's from Adam Ezekiel. Did you have times where you lost motivation and or existential issues? And how did you overcome them?
Yes. And I'm not sure, Adam, if you mean if I lost motivation or if the team did. I think the two are highly correlated.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, the answer to both issues is the same. And it's a fundamental question of leadership. And in my experience, the greatest tool, or one of the greatest tools you can use as a leader, is vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the bad side, I remember times when I was trying to say, the mobile team's great, and this is what we're going to do, and this is our vision for the future, and all of that. And I put it out as this post internally, and it got a handful of likes and not a single comment.
Mm-hmm.
It was like you could hear the crickets. It was brutal. And all I was thinking about was how important we were and
Yeah.
how big we were. And some of the most transformative experiences I've had as a manager and as a CEO have been talking about how hard it is for me, what I'm struggling with, what I'm afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
People respond to vulnerability. They respond to openness.
Yeah.
And if you can, like, one of the questions we ask regularly is, what are you afraid of?
Okay. Like, you mean in like meetings, or is it interviews, or?
Sometimes as a feedback process, we actually did it just as like a regular.
Yeah.
But just ask and really care about the answer. Like, what are you afraid of? And being able to say that and have the other person reassure you, whether it's you reassuring them or them reassuring you, is one of the best ways to restore that sense of being in it together, caring about the future, right?
Yeah.
One of the things we always observed in startups is a major reason startups die is, founders split up.
Yeah, I feel like failure of the founding team, or miscommunication, or even just differences in where you want to go, like the goals as well.
And so if you can, one of the best antibodies to that is trust and empathy and communication. And honestly, vulnerability is one of the best tools you can use.
Yeah. So I've kind of got two final questions. The second last one is, like, where do you turn to or look to for inspiration, like about products? Are there like thought leaders that you follow? You go, oh, this person knows what they're talking about.
I guess I watch people more than product leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great things about traveling is just watch what the heck people do. Right? I find that fascinating. That's probably my number one source of inspiration.
So understanding human behavior, psychology.
Yeah, and just like whenever you find a time when someone's using a product in a way you never would have predicted, I just love those moments, right? They're the best. Whenever they break some misconception you have about the world. One of the things I remember was going to South Korea and finding that all teenagers in South Korea use Facebook.
Wow.
Because their parents use KakaoTalk.
Okay, so it's like everyone uses Facebook.
Everyone
so the kids use
wants
like
to
Snapchat
play where their parents are not. And you're like, wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And my final question is, like, if people want to get in touch with you or follow Lexi or what you guys are doing, how do they do that?
Mick at lexi.io, M-I-C-K at lexi.io. Follow our page, post there, ping me on Twitter. We're on 20th Street in San Francisco. Knock on the door, bring donuts. I'm just kidding, don't bring donuts. I fall asleep if I eat donuts.
What's your Twitter handle if people want to follow you?
I think it's Mick Johnson.
At Mick Johnson.
I think so.
Okay, yes. Okay, cool. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. We're bang on 9 o'clock in Sydney and 4 p.m. here. Mm-hmm. We've got a small audience watching us and still posting questions.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and for posting questions. I hope I didn't screw it up too badly.
Really appreciate it. We're signing out. Just a little quick community announcement. We've got an event coming up. It's called the Winter Chili. We're partnering with Tech Sydney to run an event. There'll be more news posted about it soon. Cool. Look out for that. This is our first time doing a Facebook Live thing. If you like it, give us some feedback. If you don't like it, like the negative question, please tell us as well.
Yeah, please tell us how we could have made it better.
Hopefully we'll do more of these and help the community know more about whether it's product or tech, just to share more knowledge. Thanks everyone. We're signing out.
Thanks everyone. Bye.